Thank you, Nicole, and welcome to all of our participants today. As Nicole said, I'm Steve Sheehan of IBM. I am the co-chair of the Atlanta chapter, which we are very proud is one of IAOP's most active hubs. Here we serve a diverse audience of providers, advisors, and customers across the Southeast, and we are delighted to see from the lists that we are joined today by many members of our national audience as well. Thank you all for joining us. Today, our focus is on the journey to contract automation, and we are going to be talking about a special piece of work being done by our colleagues at the Georgia Technology Authority to create a mechanism for the better management of contracts throughout their life cycle. And to lead this discussion, I'm very pleased to welcome Georgia Technology Authority's Peter Blake. Peter is the Director of Contracts and Compliance at the Georgia Technology Authority, and he leads a team managing technology services contracts for the Enterprise Technology Services Program that is within the state of Georgia. Peter has over 25 years of experience providing information technology services on the service provider side of sourcing arrangements, and he's brought that experience from the private sector to the buy side of the public sector to help advance the state of Georgia's efforts to evolve the state's service delivery models. Today, through this discussion, we're helping Peter bring that experience back into an outsourcing conversation that will cut across both the public and the private sector viewpoints. Peter holds professional certifications in both project management and outsourcing, and we are delighted to have him join us for this conversation today. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Before we begin, let me just remind you, as Nicole said, that you may ask questions during the program using the Zoom technology, and we will do our best to address all of them while we are on air today. And with that, Peter, I will turn the microphone over to you. Oh, wait, before I do, I'm sorry. There is something next coming up that I wanted to point to. My mistake. The remainder of 2019, we are going on summer hiatus for next month, but we will be back in September, and I wanted to invite you to mark your calendars for September 19th, when we'll have a special program from the Everest Group on the digital transformation of outsourcing. And then later in the fourth quarter, we wanted to return to a topic that our regular listeners will be familiar with, which are the effects of shifts in the social and political context for outsourcing, how that's having an effect on the industry in which we all work. That's been a very interesting topic for us. We started discussing it in 2016. It's been a changing landscape, and we would like to check in on that topic and see how things are changing on the eve of another election in the United States. We continue to actively seek panelists, presenters, and additional relevant topics that are of interest to you, so please get in touch with us and keep these programs relevant to your practice. All right, Peter, now over to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, welcome to everybody on the call. Today, what I'm calling this is the journey to contract automation. It's really, I'm not an automation expert, but it's the story of where we are so far on our automation of our contract capabilities here at the state. So what I'll do today is I'll give you a little bit of background about the state, how we're structured at the state, the organization that I work for, and what we do for the constituents of the state. I'll walk through our problem summary, how we defined what our issues were and how we wanted to address them, and then how we went around selecting a tool, and then the implementation of what we're doing so far, and how we're measuring that, how we're going forward from that. And then we'll end up with some questions if anybody has any questions at the end. So a little bit about the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia is the 24th largest state. It's the 8th most populous state. And in the Atlanta area in Georgia, we have nearly 6 million people. It's the 9th largest city in the country, and it's 60% of the population of Georgia lives right here in Atlanta. That's where I'm at. The state gross state product is over $600 billion. So if Georgia were a standalone country, it'd be somewhere in the top 25 economies of the world. We have a really great hot credit rating. It's the highest rating for Standards & Poor's, AAA. It's been that way for a long time, and there's only 15 other states in the United States that have that rating. So in Georgia, you know, we pride ourselves on being easy to do business with. It's a great business and labor climate, and we have great training resources here in the state. So to support all that, we need to, you know, know a little bit about the state government and what it does. Our budget year is July to just begins July every year, and it's about little over $48 billion. A little over half of that comes from state funds. Those would be taxes and fees and revenue that the state collects. And then the little less than half comes from other funding sources, federal grants, other grants, you know, private agreements. So in the state, we have a law that requires us to have a balanced budget. So, and the state is governed by 3 branches of government, similar to the federal government: legislative, executive, and judicial. And in the executive branch, which is headed by the governor here, there's over 120 departments, agencies, commissions that report through the executive branch. Statewide, there's 59,000 employees. That's not including our Board of Regents, which is the university system of Georgia. So I work for an organization that's Georgia Technology Authority, GTA. It was created in the year 2000. At that time, the state wanted to kind of consolidate some stuff and have an enterprise approach to the state use of IT. Prior to that, every agency, commission, organization within the state had their own IT departments and were making their own rules and kind of marching to their own beat of the drum. So GTA kind of consolidated that and came up with some policies and an approach that the state could follow. We manage the central IT infrastructure for the state. We have data centers, network security, telecom services. And again, we do all the policies and standards for the state. Recently, we've increased that scope, and we manage the Georgia Cyber Center, which is a cybersecurity training and working facility. It's associated with the Savannah State University, or Augusta State University over in Augusta, and it provides training and labor and things for cybersecurity. So you notice that our name is Georgia Technology Authority. So there's a difference between an authority and a state agency. We're an authority, and we don't get any appropriated funds from the state, directly from the state. So what our revenue, the money that we make, that we use to fund ourselves, is through our services and data sales. So we've got to have spot-on services because our customers are not required to come to us at all. So within GTA, we have a program called GETS. I'm drilling this down a little bit further. GETS stands for the Georgia Enterprise Technology Services. And that's a program for infrastructure and network services that we provide to other entities within the state. So we have 40,000 IT infrastructure end users. We offer 47,000 email accounts, 1.8 petabytes of storage, 3,500 servers, and we have a managed network service for that has over 100,000 users spread across 1,200 state agencies and municipalities in the state. Here's what that looks like. If you look at the graphic here, you see that there's 14 GETS agencies. Primarily, there's 14 all-in agencies that they gave up all of their IT functions, and they're being provided for by our GTA agency through our GETS program. That includes their phone services, their networks, their mainframes, security servers, disaster recovery, desktops, laptops. All of that is provided by us. Beyond that, there's another 86 executive branch agencies that receive some services from us, whether it be phone, mainframe or network or security server service, that they don't receive all our services, but they receive some of our services. Then beyond that, we have 100,000 users that are at will. They're mostly our phone and our network services, but they're agencies and entities out in the state that purchase our services. So I mentioned GETS. Let me give you a quick little history of how this GETS program, where we offer our services, came to be. And I'll start with a kind of a timeline and run through it. So back in around 2007, 2008 timeframe, the state recognized that we had a real problem with infrastructure security and other concerns. Mostly it was network security, and we had an aging infrastructure. We had a lot of old equipment, old software out in the environment that really needed to be paid attention to. The way that we did that is we did some outsourcing contracts. We brought in providers to manage network service. We brought in a provider to do our infrastructure services. So when we did that, we consolidated 24 different service desks. We consolidated print functions, and we started a refresh program where we went down and we consolidated and refreshed all the hardware. So we started out with two contracts that we had, one for managed network services and one for infrastructure services. After we were doing that for about 7 or 8 years, I guess it was, we realized that there was going to be a need. We needed to closely integrate these accounts, these contracts and these services. We envisioned bringing in more services, which would be more contracts. And so in order to do that, we created this multi-source integrated service provider model, where we have an integrator, another contract that we had with another service provider, that would provide a common set of tools, help desk, ticketing systems, billing systems, backup and recovery systems. So all the common stuff went to our integrator, and we still had the infrastructure and the managed network services contract. And then just a couple of years ago, the infrastructure contract services that we had, which had many towers of service within it, was drawing near to its natural expiration date. So what we did is we looked at that contract, and when we went out to rebid the contract out, and state has guidelines on how we can procure services and competitive bids, and that's all part of it. We looked at the services that we were providing and the way we did it. And back at the beginning of GATE 2010 is what we called it then, the GETS program had a need for one provider. It was real efficient for having one provider provide all of our infrastructure services. But when we looked at rebidding that, it made a little more sense to break out the services separately and bid them separately to see what the market could do, because lots of technology changes, advances, and evolves, and we wanted to get advantage of the newer technology, and we wanted to be able to position ourselves so that we could look to the future, and these contracts would serve the constituents of the state of Georgia well. So we ended up breaking out these different contracts, and now we have 7 different contracts, and we have an integrator that does it. So it's really what we're calling a multi-source dynamic operation model. All these contracts with the IT services, they're kind of plug and play now. We have separate contracts for print and mail services, mainframe services, server services, end user computing services. We still have our managed network service. So what happened was we kind of evolved. We had 2 large service contracts in 2008, and now all of a sudden we're looking at 7 diverse contracts with a contract value of over $900 million, and we still haven't added in new services. If there's a technology change in the environment, we have the ability to add more, which would create more. So our current methods of managing all these contracts are only going to get us so far. So what was keeping us up at night was things that we were thinking about was how are we going to handle all these additional contracts? We already knew we had some problems with version control. People would, print out a copy of a contract, put it in a drawer, and then a year later they'd pull it out and try to use it. And then of course, contracts are living documents, they change, and they may not have been working from the latest contract. And so we have a large team that manages these services. They don't always know the contract. So sometimes they know their specific area, but they don't know what we bought, and they don't know, are we getting what we are paying for? We didn't have a way of rating and ranking all the suppliers across the board uniformly. We knew that we were going to be changing some processes with all these new providers, and how were we going to manage all those new processes. And from governance forms, we weren't quite sure how we were going to handle the action items, the issues, the risks that came out. We didn't know if when we broke out these IT services into separate towers, what kind of compliance issues might come up. We thought we had them all covered, but what if something new comes up? How can we make reporting easier? Like I said, if we add more services, we bring in more suppliers. So around here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we have all the right information at the right time and the right people to make those decisions. And so we knew that we had concerns about that. So the first thing that we did is we knew that we were doing all this manually through spreadsheets. I've got a great team that they were doing a wonderful job doing it manually. But manual processes are error prone, they're time consuming, and we knew we had issues. So some of the issues that we knew we had was, again, the version control issue. Contract change sometimes took a long time because of routing things around. We actually had people walking around with paper, getting people to sign it and going from floor to floor to office to get signatures. We were tracking contract milestones through spreadsheets, which we were real efficient at doing, but that's probably not the optimal way to do that. We knew we had obligations in the contract. We were tracking some, but we knew that there were some that we weren't quite tracking, or we were tracking, but they were in a different part of GTA that was tracking them, and we didn't have a consolidated view of how well we were doing. We also had some inconsistencies in the contracts. We tried to make our contracts as uniform as possible, but you can't always do that. And so each contract is negotiated, but we didn't have a tool that would keep them consistent and tell us, when we're negotiating, remind us these are important. We need to stick to these. And in these contracts, a little bit different. We have some non-standard processes and things, and so we need to know 4 or 5 months out. Sometimes we have to take some action, and then other contracts, it's only 30 days out. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't miss that. So we knew we had value leakage in our contracts. We knew some of the causes, but we really had no way of quantifying what our value leakage was. So in addition to these large GETS contracts that we have, it's important to note that we have other contracts also. There's over 200 other contracts for other support services that we have. And they're not quite as large as the other ones, and they have fewer obligations and risks, but they were being loosely tracked, and we needed to tighten up those controls also. So when we looked at all that, we decided we probably had probably 3 choices. The first one was to do nothing. This wasn't really a real option, but it was, well, let's not do anything. Let's wait, manage it as we can, and see what happens when things break. We'll fix them. That really was a reactive stance, and didn't really seem like a good option. The second one was to invest in our current processes. So we knew that we had more contracts, so I could just throw more people, more money at it, buy more spreadsheets, more folks to run those spreadsheets, and try to manage it the way we were. hire a larger team. But that didn't seem like the appropriate use of constituents money for us either. So the other option was we could automate our contract process. You know, we could find a vendor that would help us address our concerns. We could do something about it. But when we looked around, you know, everybody told us things like when you automate, you know, your contract process, you could see a 55% improvement in compliance, a 50% reduction in cycle times, or a 25% improvement in renewal rates, 1 or 2% improvement in revenue. So we heard all those, and so it kind of drove us towards contract automation. So we started looking into it, and the first thing that happened, really the first thing that happened, was we had some analysis paralysis. When we went out there and we looked, there's hundreds of providers that offer products, and within those products, there's numerous different features that they offer. So there's a lot of different products out there, and there's a lot of features within those products that all differ. So there was a lot of stuff that we had to sift through and look at. And it kind of took us back a minute because we really had to figure out what it is that we needed first. So from a project management experience, you know, I know that an all-in-one approach for an implementation, you know, the big bang approach to just put it in there and make it all work. When you do that, you often have a momentum loss. You know, people's expectations are not met when a product gets put in like that, and you end up achieving only a portion of what you really wanted to achieve in the first place. So we knew we didn't want to try to do that because we wanted to be successful at this. We needed to be successful at this. So we recognized that just getting the most basic, most needed features up and running would provide the largest improvement for us. So we had to have a little plan. And when we talked to other people who had automated, we talked to industry experts, got some consultants and advice. We knew what we needed to do. We had to create a vision of what we wanted to look like in the future. How did we want our contracts to work? And after we did that, then we had to really do a real assessment of our current state. We had to review all our processes. We had to make sure that we understood what we were doing. This was a little bit easier for us than we thought, because we had, at the same time, we had started a innovative project where we're trying to use lean methodologies in our office. So we had already kind of started reviewing our processes, and we had complete documentation. We had documented all our processes, wrote, you know, we documented everything. Everything was written out, diagrammed. So we really kind of knew our processes well. So we took the current value, the current status that we're at, and looked at our future vision, and we addressed the gap in between. And we figured out, okay, how can we get there from here? One of the pieces was automation, and the other one was we had to look at some of our processes and see, okay, which ones do we need to address, to work on, to get better, quicker, and faster. Again, this was still a lot for us to look at. We had to decide what were we going to do first. So we started identifying requirements and objectives, and then we prioritized our needs. Again, we knew that we needed a common repository for all our stuff to keep the current versions of the contracts. We knew we wanted to see the latest versions and see the changes that happened to them. We needed proactive alerting. We wanted to know what dates were important when they came up, and before we missed anything, we wanted to know early warning of them. Our milestones notifications, we wanted to prevent unexpected events, because there's things in the contracts that if one event triggers another event, you need to know that. And so we didn't have that ability when we were doing it manually all the time. You had to be pretty sharp to realize, oh, wait, that has an impact over here. So again, we double checked all our processes to make sure they were documented. And that took quite a bit of time, but we made sure that it was all done. And then we always felt it was important to keep our automation rollout in sync with our maturity level. Coming from doing things manually and with spreadsheets, and knowing that we wanted this system, whatever system we brought in, to be successful, we knew that as we matured, we'd want to add features, but we didn't want to add them all at the beginning. So we wanted something that was expandable. So we had objectives. We wanted to make sure we could measure the value of our contracts. We wanted a centralized repository. We wanted to be able to look at our deliverables and obligations. We wanted to improve the contract change. We wanted to reduce all those manual efforts. We wanted to be able to link across our accounts, our contracts. We have multiple contracts. When we had one provider doing all the infrastructure services, we kind of knew what all the towers were doing. But now that we had it broken out to different contracts, we needed to be able to see how things were doing in one place. We wanted a way that, I say rate here, but we wanted a way to evaluate the performance of our contracts. Are we receiving the value out of contracts that we're paying for? And we wanted to have a dashboard analytics. Again, this speaks to that, having the right information at the right time to make the right decisions by the right people. So we started looking at contract automation tools, and most of them address the contract lifecycle management. And so what I've got here on the screen is, it's really the lifecycle of contract managing, everything from authoring to negotiation to execution, approvals, billing, auditing, monitoring, amendment, closing, and archiving. When we looked at that lifecycle, and we looked at our issues where we had concerns, we noticed that most of our concerns were in that after contract signing portion. So that was the focus that we really wanted to see was, how can we better manage these contracts after signing? The state does a pretty good job of the procurement start because a lot of that is dictated to how it has to happen. But we wanted to better manage in here. So when we looked at products, we knew that they had common features. So a lot of these are common features in all products. They do authoring, they do templates, they do automation of the workflow. So these kind of things, we knew that no matter what product we have, we were going to get some of these things, most of these things. So what we did is we worked on drawing up a short list of solutions of providers that could meet our needs. We looked at a lot of products, but we narrowed them down. We interviewed a lot of users who were using other products to find out, what they thought worked best for them, how they were doing, and how it was going for them. We used organizations like IAOP and Gartner, and we gathered industry information to find out, things. We sought tools that were configurable to our needs, that could address, maintaining our contract value, and then we wanted that increased capability as we matured. So when we looked at a lot of products, we finally decided on a product that's made by Syrian Labs. We selected them to help us. We found them to be a value lead in the value leader quadrant in like money spend here is an example of it. But they have a really good product and they're focused on after signing implementations, managing those deliverables and obligations. They do that really well. So we're using that product. It's a cloud-based solution. It's a flexible tool. It allows, it has analytics built into it, and it allows for forecasting and information that you can draw out of it. It has a quick implementation. It comes with customer service support, and it has modules that can be activated as we matured. So it had everything on the list that we were looking for. Here's an example of the lifecycle management modules that they have. The ones that are in green are the ones that we're primarily focused on our implementation early on. We do have that integrator role who does some of our common tools like our invoicing and things. So some of this we don't need at the current time, but as we mature, other modules can be activated. So now we had a provider that was going to bring in a product. We wanted to make sure that we knew what success looked like. So we set some success criteria. A lot of these look just like identified the needs earlier on, but that's exactly what we did. Is we wanted to, how do we know we're successful? Is when we have that central repository, that we have visibility into the changes, that we can track some obligations, that we can look at our service levels in the tool. We wanted to make sure that they collected metadata so that we could search and do research within our contract documents. That creating that metadata really helps make more efficient use of the contracts. We wanted traceable workflows, so the product for our deliverables, our obligations, and our changes has a complete workflow with a communication so that people can put notes, and it's there. We can tie them together so we can see exactly what happened, who did what, and where things were in it. We can put our templates in there. And it has the dashboards, the analytics. Syrian has a maturity model built in that they work with us. We have a communication plan, and they'll assess the maturity level of the tool, of use of the tool. So that helps us with getting our users into the tool and making sure that they're using it properly. So we get some insight into how people are using the tool while we're moving along. And this was real compatible. We wanted to make sure that it's compatible with our lean environment. It helps us be efficient, improved, quicker, simpler. And for the state of Georgia, we have some transparency requirements, open records. Since we are a state organization, we need to make sure that everything is really visible, and this has a lot of the features that allow that. And again, it's flexible, addresses our future needs. When we get to a level we want to mature and we want to pull in more modules, we can do that. So the implementation. We're working with Syrian, and we're in the middle of the implementation as we speak. We broke it into two phases, two approaches. One was to load the large GETS contracts that we have, and then the next phase was to load the other 200 or so contracts that we had for support services. The approach we took was that we established a project manager on our side, and they have a project manager on their side. Those are the central points of contact, and they manage and they meet daily. They support the weekly reports out, and they keep the stakeholders informed on every bit of the implementation. So the first thing that they did was they scanned, they created the metadata, they extracted all the obligations and deliverables, and loaded those documents into the tool. They created a sandbox, a test environment, with all the contract documents in it. And it works just like the production environment. So we were able to run all our UAT testing in there, but we were also able to use it for user training. So our users could go in, see the tool, train in the tool, and do real live exercises in the tool, and it helped acclimate them to using an automated tool. After we satisfied our UAT concerns and anything that was raised during UAT was addressed, we created the production environment and ported it out. So where are we with our implementation right now? Is that the GETS contracts, the large GETS contracts, the 7 of them, they're all live right now in the production tool, and all processes are active. We've got users up and running, and not only do we use the tool, but our providers are using the tool too. So we've provided them access to the tool so that we're both working in the tool now. Phase 2 is about 50% done. That's the other contracts, the other 200 contracts they're loading. They're in UAT, and they're in training as right now. So, and again, one of the big things here was that we wanted to make sure that we didn't rush into this too quickly. We wanted to address our concerns and then we wanted to be able to mature, but we wanted to be able to take advantage of additional features. So assessing the maturity is key here. And the way that it's done is again, we have a systematic communication program that we deliver ongoing training all the time. It drives user engagement by notifying, messages. We're trying to get, regular messages out to all our users, talking about the system, what we're doing. Usage reports tell us how the system is being used. And again, because we're using this lean environment, we're encouraging everybody to look at those processes. We automated our current manual processes. And so we know that once those start running through the tool, through an automated process, we will find efficiencies. So we're counting on and encouraging our users to identify those and make our processes better and more efficient. Now, Syrian helps us they do random, or not random, but regular surveys, and they provide us usage reports that tell us how well we're adapting to the system, who's using the system and how often, and the process utilization. Do we have a process that is running slower than all the rest, and we can look and see why that is, and if there's additional training needed to users or on a process. So assessing that maturity was key to us because we want to make sure that this is implemented and it's successful the first time around. And so Syrian is really helping us with that. They've done a lot of work in their product to bring that as a feature. So like I said, we're just at the beginning. We've implemented one set of our contracts. We're halfway through implementing the others. So I really can't tell you it's going well so far. I can't tell you, how well it is because we're just beginning. But the one thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to capture lessons learned. So although we don't have a lot of them identified yet because we're so early in the process, we did identify areas and things that we wanted to look for. So we're looking to make sure that we are receiving the value that we expected from our contracts, and are our contracts costing us what we expected. We want to make sure that the implementation of this automation is efficient. Are we using the resources appropriately for automation? And we want to be able to measure that GTA level of commitment. We need our people to embrace this new tool, this new automated process, and adopt and adapt to it. We're looking for operational risks and impacts. So anything that, as we start automating this and we look at those processes, we want to capture those impacts. And again, it's expectations versus reality. We were very careful with our communications to set realistic and proper expectations. And now, as we have just begun implementing this tool, reality hits. We want to make sure that the reality of using this tool matches what the user experience is. So again, this is really just the start of our journey. We really have to learn to walk before we can run. But I thought it was important that I bring this to you to show you what steps we went through to get here. Again, we're right at the beginning, but so far it's going really well, and we're looking forward to the success of it. And with that, Steve, do you have any questions that are accumulating out there?
I have a few while our audience is weighing in, Peter, so thank you. It's really an ambitious project that you have going on here, and trying to bring order and efficiency to something like the scale of what's going on in so large a state as we have here in Georgia. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, almost $1 billion of technology services that you're flowing out to tens of thousands of users. So I really appreciate the challenges that you've been trying to address. Let me go back to where you started when GTA was creating the GETS program and looking at enterprise technology services, and you had the two contracts that you have. Was the primary objective to save the state money by sort of consolidating or outsourcing infrastructure and the managed network services into the GETS program?
Actually, it was not. It wasn't even one of the focuses. It primarily was on security and the aging infrastructure. We had a real need to consolidate our data centers. There were servers located all over the state. Some of them in not the most secure locations, not in the safest. You know, I know that they had servers in the basements of buildings and you know, in closets and stuff. So it really wasn't about money. It was about security and safety of the equipment of the network.
And then I know that's consistent with Georgia has taken a leading role in the development of cybersecurity, you know, preventive measures. It's something that all state governments, you know, are looking at now. I certainly know that for, you know, across our whole client set, and it's a very big part of our practice is to address the cybersecurity issue. So that makes perfect sense. You mentioned earlier that you're using Lean. I made a note in your office, and I was wondering how that fits together with automation, because Lean I associate more with process renovation, and then automation, of course, we dot those things through a process. They support and enable a process, but sometimes they're really managed as different things. How do those two relate for you guys? What are you using Lean to do?
We were actually looking at our processes. It's a little more difficult to do than in a manufacturing environment. You know, it's pretty straightforward. In an office environment, and especially in contract administration, you don't have things like tickets, but we do have processes. So we were using it to help identify our processes and help us look at and evaluate our processes to make them more efficient, more effective. We're not trying, our objective isn't really to try to save money. I mean, it will if it's done right, but what we were looking for in the Lean technology is, in the methodologies, was to have our people look at their processes, document, be able to measure their processes and find efficiencies. And then when we do find those efficiencies, and whether it's through automation or any other method, hopefully what that provides back is time to my team. And rather than fill that time with more tasks, I want them to use that time to find more ways to make what they do more effective and more forward, future looking. So it's a little harder to do in an office environment, but that's what we're doing. And so this tool for contract automation really fits well into that whole Lean methodology that we're trying to put in place here.
And it's interesting that you recognize the interplay between those two things, because we often have the situation with customers who often, of course, look to us for technology solutions to say, you know, have we looked at process first to make sure that you are automating the right things, right? So you know, it's and if we really make sure that we're addressing the interplay of those two things, as you seem to be doing with the approach to this project, you're on much more solid ground. So, you know, I think that's really good. We have a question from one of our listeners who said you showed a slide of all the things that are keeping you up at night. And I know it's a little too early to have total results on the project, but are those things still keeping you up at night, or do you think they're being addressed?
They're not keeping me up at night as much as they used to. They're still out there. But I think we have taken steps in the right direction to addressing them. A lot of those things have to do with unsure of how we're handling things in the future. And I think this automation moves a lot of those forward just a little bit, so that at least we've identified a path forward. So yeah, I think I'm sleeping a little better at night.
Yeah, I mean, it seems you have a process that's underway to make sure that all of those things are cared for. And in addition to that, the tool itself, as you pointed out, I think has given you a means of evaluating how well you're doing on all of those things. So you've got a report card where before you didn't even have the report card.
Correct.
Yeah, so that would make me sleep a little better too. At least I'm going to know the answer. I may still have work to do, but I'm going to know the answer. You mentioned that, I know the system now is fully operational for the 7 large contracts. That's almost $1 billion in spend, but you also mentioned that you were loading other contracts into it. Are they all, what other kinds of contracts are you going to subject to this process? Are they all information technology?
They're all technology associated, but they're for, the contracts are mostly from our procurement team, and they're for support of GTA services. A lot of times it's the greater GTA services outside of the GETS program. But there are things for, software, support services, facilities, equipment, those kind of things.
Okay. All right. So it is really all, it's in the same family. Let me ask you something else. You're far enough down the road now with the implementation. And having set an ambitious goal, and I think you did a judicious job of carefully saying what we wanted to do with this and what you wouldn't try to do with it. What has been the hardest so far? What's been the most challenging aspect of getting this whole thing set up and operational?
Once we got past the whole analysis paralysis of trying to figure out once we got past that, I think that the implementation, the largest challenge has just been getting our users, our employees, to adapt to this change. The automation is changing a lot, and a lot of people, a lot of roles, the way that they do these processes, it's going to change them. So we had to do a lot of communication, a lot of demonstration, a lot of training to get everybody aware of what was coming first. And then once it was here, we had to introduce it in a positive way and set the proper expectations for the use of the tool, so that they not only could see the opportunities, but they could also envision additional opportunities. So I think the largest challenge has just been getting our folks to look at it and embrace it. And I think we've done a fairly good job. Like I said, it's early on, but I think we've made good strides in that area.
And that's consistent with what we discovered in most of these conversations. When we're talking about outsourcing solutions, we talk about the fact that whatever the solution is, there are 3 elements you can depend on. It's people, process, and technology. Now you've hit all 3, right? You've got the process, you've got the technology to assist you, but you also have to, in order to make the whole thing work, have to address the people requirements for the folks who are going to be using it, implementing it, learning from it, and improving it as you go through. So I think that's really good. We have another question from one of our listeners. How is the tool helping you curb the value leakage? Do you have any numbers yet that can prove if the tool is actually going to pay for itself? Is there a self-funding aspect to this?
And again, because of the organization, we are measuring some of it, but ROI was not our primary focus, but we were looking to receive all the value that we expected from our contracts. So we were seeing that where before we were managing the contract, we were managing the largest of the deliverables in a way to make sure that we were getting, functionally that the contracts were delivering what they were supposed to. Within every deal, there's a lot of little wills and shalls, weekly reports, things that if they're done properly, kind of pave the road for excellent service. A lot of that was being done by maybe our operations teams, and we didn't have insight into it. Now that we have this tool, we have insight into that. We know that this week there was 68 some odd different obligations that were due to us, and we're seeing that our providers are doing those things, and it's helped remove some of the ambiguity out of it, because
Sure.
we have this now, and that both the providers and GTA have the same list printed, and we're working from it. We can look out. Before we had the contract, we may not have actually sat down and pulled out all those and viewed all of them. We may have had a larger, higher level list. So I think through that we'll see some increased value in what we're receiving.
Yeah, and I can see how it would be hard to know exactly what you're saving, because without the tool itself, in the old the way things used to operate, you're not even really aware of all the things you're missing and not getting.
Correct.
Now
That's why I say,
knew
we had value leakage. We just didn't have a way to measure
quantify it. Right, you couldn't quantify it. Let me ask you a slightly different question, because I'm curious as to the effect on this of your providers. Being a provider myself, I'm always curious as to, and you have an interesting perspective, because you've moved from the provider chair to the customer chair in outsourcing conversation. That gives you a perspective that can be valuable for all of the rest of us. And now that you're on the customer side of the table and you look across at all of us providers, I wonder, what do you wish we would stop or start doing with our contract initiatives? Is there something that you would say, now that I'm a customer, I'm really tired of seeing this in a contract, or I want my providers to be doing something? What would it be?
I think we've taken steps to address these things, but again, it's more than just the contract. And it speaks to these obligations and deliverables. It's sitting down beforehand and making sure that we all agree on both sides of, the solution that you're providing is going to address my concern, my needs, and then how are we going to measure we're getting there? More than just an SLA, but the whole value of the contract, we're measuring that. So it making that clear. This automation tool helps do that. So I think we're going to see this more and more going forward in arrangements where there's going to be an automated contract tool involved. And it may be that the customer brings it, or it may be that the providers start bringing a tool like this. But it drives a lot of the ambiguity and the potential misunderstandings out of contracts. So,
well, and you're right. I mean, it holds both parties to account, which we should be. I mean, there are obligations on both sides. All of these agreements have some sort of reciprocal character, and it's important. So having a tool like this that will create the basis for the conversations we're having with one another it can be really helpful. I spoke to a client not too long ago who said, well, his philosophy of contracting was, well, you sign it and then you sort of throw it in a drawer and you really don't look at it again because you manage everything through the relationship. If the relationship is good, I can get anything I want. And I thought, well, that's an awful lot of wasted effort. I mean, we try to craft these things carefully, right, so that they can chart our path. And this tool, the way you've described it, really helps us do that. It helps us maximize the relationship, not forget what we set out to do, and keep us honest in terms of the performance obligations that we each have. So yeah, I really support this whole kind of move, and I hope there is more of it. One of the things I've seen in just my own recent experience as a provider, I've seen an increased interest on the part of customers when they're entering into these things to seek to future-proof the contract. And by that they mean really requiring providers to continue to innovate, to apply new techniques or technologies, things that could become available during the term of the agreement. Nobody wants to sign a 5-year agreement and then have the world change completely in year 3 and say, oh, I have to wait 2 years to get innovation. So there's a move on to do that. Would flexible arrangements like that, would building that kind of flexibility into contracts make it difficult for you to manage using the tool like Syrian Labs' tool?
No, not at all. Actually, we have some of those provisions built into our contracts where we ask our providers to look and embrace some innovation, and if there's a landscape change, bring it to us, and we can do that. Actually, the tool makes some of that easier. And we address it in different ways in different contracts, but whether it be a quarterly meeting where we talk about industries changing, technologies and things that might be changing, and how the services that we're receiving might be affected by that, or whether it's an actual change. The tool allows for the contract change to be very quick and efficient, and it helps us identify all the areas. So if there is a dramatic change and we need to change the agreement to say something, or if there's some innovative change, we've already handled it, and it can identify all the areas in the contract that need to be changed when that happens.
Okay, so it actually accommodates that kind of flexibility.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I have more questions. We always have less time than we have interest in things like this, but we're almost out of time. And Peter, I want to thank you for sharing the special perspective you have on this from this project with us today. I'd also like to thank all of our listeners for your attention and your engagement and your questions. And I would also note that you're going to be able to go deeper on this topic by attending a special session on it that's going to be featured at the next Outsourcing World Summit, which, as you all know, I think is February 17th to 19th in Orlando. And we're going to be talking again about contract automation. So there'll be more then if you'd like to go deeper on this. I hope you will respond to the invitation that you'll receive to provide feedback on today's program. Those responses really are very helpful to us. They help us modify our topics and our approach. And I also hope that you'll join us again when we return from our summer break in September. And you can mark your calendars for Thursday, September 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern, when we'll be airing an important program on the digital transformation of outsourcing from our colleagues at the Everest Group. But thank you for your attendance today. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.